Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The aroma of roasted coffee and cinnamon hung in the air of the small cafe in the heart of Manhattan, mixing with the morning buzz of New York. Lila adjusted her purse strap on her shoulder. Her brown eyes quickly scanned the crowded space for a free table. It was Monday, and as always, Shed arrived 15 minutes early for work, a habit Shed developed since moving to the big city 6 months ago. The line snaked almost to the door, filled with impatient executives checking their phones and college students yawning over open books. Lila bit her lower lip, a nervous tic that appeared whenever she felt out of place. And there, surrounded by people who seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they wanted from life, she definitely felt lost. "A double cappuccino, no sugar, and an almond croissant," she murmured to the cashier, a young woman with pink hair who chewed gum while typing in the order. Lila fished coins from her wallet, counting carefully. She still wasn't completely used to the city's prices. That's when it happened. A tall man with slightly tousled dark hair and broad shoulders beneath a gray wool coat turned abruptly from the table where he was getting sugar. His movement was too quick, careless, and the hot coffee cup in his hand collided directly with Lila's, who had just received her cappuccino. The hot liquid splashed everywhere, on her white blouse, on the wooden floor, on his dress pants. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Lila looked down, watching the brown stains spread across the light fabric of her favorite blouse, the one Shed bought especially to feel more confident at work. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." His voice was deep, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately identify. I wasn't paying attention." Lila looked up and found herself face to face with the most striking face Shed ever seen. Intense blue eyes, almost storm-colored, watched her with a mixture of genuine mortification and something else, a curiosity that made her stomach do a little flip. He had a barely perceptible scar on his chin, and a crooked smile that even in the chaos of the moment managed to be devastatingly charming. "It's okay," Lila managed to stammer, though her voice came out higher than normal. "Accidents happen." But it wasn't okay. She could feel the curious stares from other customers, could see the stains spreading even more across her blouse, and knew Shed be late to work for the first time since starting the job. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of the blouse, but from the overwhelming feeling that nothing in her life seemed to be going right lately. "No, it's definitely not okay," he said, grabbing several napkins from the nearest table. "Look, let me at least pay for dry cleaning. Or, better yet," he hesitated, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "There's a department store 2 blocks from here. I could buy you a new blouse." Lila blinked, surprised. "You don't need to do that." "Really, I do need to," he interrupted gently, offering her the napkins. "I'm Ethan, by the way, Ethan Vargas, and you just met my most uncoordinated version, which, to be honest, isn't exactly the first impression I was planning to make today." Despite herself, Lila felt a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. There was something about the way he spoke, a mix of sincerity and self-deprecating humor that completely disarmed her irritation. "Lila," she replied, dabbing at her blouse with the napkins, though she knew it wouldn't help much. "Lila Harper, and to be fair, I wasn't paying much attention either." "Lila," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Well, Lila Harper, how about we turn this disastrous morning around? There's a little French cafe around the corner, much quieter than this chaos. I could buy you a new coffee without spilling it this time, I promise. While we figure out the blouse situation." Lila hesitated. All her urban safety rules were screaming at her to refuse, catch a taxi, and go straight to work. She didn't know this man. She didn't do this sort of thing. She was careful, planned, predictable. But there was something about Ethan that made her want to break her own rules. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not just at her face, but as if he was really seeing her. Or maybe it was how he smiled when she said her name, a smile that reached his eyes and made little crinkles form at the corners. "I really should go to work," she began, but her voice lacked conviction. "Please," Ethan said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice now. "Let me make this right. I can't let you walk away knowing I ruined your morning." Lila looked at him, really looked. She saw how he held his own coffee cup, now half empty, as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with his hands. She noticed how he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, nervous in a way that completely contrasted with his confident appearance, and there was something in his eyes, a raw sincerity that made something stir in her chest. "Okay," she heard herself saying, surprising herself. "But just a quick coffee. I really do need to get to work soon." The smile that lit up Ethan's face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Perfect." And Lila, "Yes, thank you for giving me a second chance." As they walked toward the door, Lila couldn't stop wondering what she was getting herself into. There was something about Ethan Vargas that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, scared, but strangely eager to discover what would happen if she allowed herself to fall. What she didn't know was that in that moment, her carefully planned life was about to take a completely different turn. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the cafe, and Lila still found herself thinking about those stormy blue eyes more times than she'd like to admit. She had kept the business card Ethan gave her that day, an elegant cream paper with embossed gold letters that read, "Ethan Vargas, Development Director, Vargas and Associates," between the pages of her favorite book, like a precious secret she didn't dare reveal even to herself. The company networking event was in full swing in the elegant ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers that made light dance in golden prisms across the vaulted ceiling. Lila adjusted the navy blue dress shed bought especially for the occasion, an investment that had made her budget groan, but that made her feel more confident and professional. The fabric hugged her curves elegantly, and Shed even dared to wear a subtle red lipstick, something completely outside her comfort zone. "Lila, you look beautiful tonight." Emma, her coworker, commented as she approached with 2 champagne glasses. "That dress is perfect on you." Finally decided to let loose a little, Lila accepted the glass, feeling the bubbles burst delicately against her lips. "Thank you. I thought it was time to invest a bit more in my professional appearance. Well, whatever the reason, it's working. Look at all the looks you're getting." Emma laughed, gently nudging her with her elbow. Lila was about to protest when she felt something. A presence, a familiar magnetism that made every fiber of her being awaken instantly. She turned slowly, as if she knew exactly what she would find. And there he was. Ethan Vargas stood near the ballroom entrance, devastatingly elegant in an impeccable black tuxedo that seemed to have been tailored specifically to accentuate his broad shoulders and confident posture. His dark hair was perfectly styled this time, but still maintained that rebellious touch that had intrigued her since their first meeting. And when their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, Lila felt her heart race as if Shed just run a marathon. He smiled. That crooked, devastating smile she had unintentionally memorized, and began walking toward her with a determination that made the air around her feel electrically charged. Lila Harper. His deep voice cut through the event's chatter as he approached, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. "What a wonderful surprise to find you here." "Ethan," she managed to say, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, considering her heart was beating like an out-of-control drum. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Business," he explained, but his eyes never left hers. "My company is considering a partnership with Harper Tech. I imagine it's a coincidence that you work for a company with the same last name." Lila laughed, feeling more relaxed. No family relation. Just luck. Or bad luck. Depending on how you look at it. Definitely luck," Ethan said, and there was something in the way he said it that made Lila feel butterflies in her stomach. "Especially because it means I can do this properly this time." He extended his hand formally. "Ethan Vargas, it's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Harper." Lila laughed genuinely now, accepting his hand. The touch was electric, exactly as she remembered, except this time she was prepared for the current that passed between them. "Lila Harper, the pleasure is mine, Mr. Vargas. Much better than our first introduction," he said, still holding her hand a little longer than would be appropriate. "No spilled coffee this time, thank goodness," Lila replied, gently withdrawing her hand, though every cell in her body protested against the loss of contact. "This dress cost much more than that blouse." Ethan laughed, a rich, warm sound that made something stir deep in her chest. "Well, if it's any consolation, you look absolutely stunning tonight. That dress. Blue is definitely your color." Lila felt warmth rise up her neck and cheeks. She wasn't used to receiving such direct compliments, especially from men who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Thank you. You also look very nice. Just very nice," Ethan teased. his eyes sparkling with amusement. "I was aiming for devastatingly irresistible, but I suppose very nice is a start." His boldness should have made her retreat, but instead, Lila found herself smiling. There was something about the way Ethan played with her, not predatory or disrespectful but genuinely amused, that made her want to play along too. "Well," she said, feigning serious consideration. "Maybe attractive would be more accurate." "Steady progress," Ethan exclaimed, and his genuine joy made Lila laugh again. "And here I was thinking it'd have to work much harder to impress you." "Who says you've impressed me yet?" Lila shot back, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan placed his hand over his heart in an exaggerated gesture of shock. "Ouch. Well, clearly I need to step up my efforts. How about we start with a drink? I promise not to spill anything on you this time." Lila looked at the half-empty champagne glass in her hand, then back at Ethan. There was something dangerous in those blue eyes, something that promised adventure and excitement, things she had carefully avoided her entire life. But tonight, in this dress that made her feel like a braver version of herself, she wanted to be dangerous too. "All right," she said, finishing her champagne in one gulp, "but only if you tell me what a company like yours actually does. Development is pretty vague." Ethan smiled, offering his arm. "Deal. But first, let me properly introduce you to the bar. I have a feeling tonight is going to be much more interesting than I expected." As they walked through the ballroom, Lila noticed how other people watched them, especially the women whose gazes followed Ethan with obvious interest. But he seemed completely oblivious to all the attention, focused entirely on her, as if she were the only person in the crowded ballroom. "So," Ethan said when they reached the elegant bar, "what does a talented young woman like you do at Harper Tech?" "Data analysis," Lila replied, accepting the new champagne glass Head ordered for her. "Basically, I take confusing numbers and turn them into something that makes sense for people who make important decisions." "Smart and modest," Ethan observed. "I'm sure it's much more complex than that." Lila felt herself blush again. "And you? What exactly does your company develop?" "Mainly security software for multinational companies," Ethan explained, leaning casually against the bar in a way that brought them closer together. "Systems that protect valuable information from people who shouldn't have it." "Interesting," Lila said, genuinely curious. "Must be pretty intense work." "It can be," Ethan agreed, his eyes darkening slightly. "But tonight, the only intense thing I want to think about is finding out everything about Lila Harper." The intensity in his voice made something clench in her stomach. There were promises in those words, possibilities that made her feel simultaneously terrified and thrilled. "Be careful what you wish for," she murmured, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan leaned slightly closer, his voice low and intimate. "Oh, Lila, I'm always very careful about what I wish for, and right now I very much want to discover all your secrets." The air between them was charged with a tension that made Lila feel like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff. Part of her wanted to retreat, return to the safety of her predictable life. But a bigger part, a part she didn't even know existed, wanted to dive headfirst into the unknown that Ethan represented. "What if I tell you I don't have any interesting secrets?" she challenged. Ethan smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through in the middle of a storm. "Then I'd say, you're seriously underestimating your own fascination." 2 weeks after the Plaza event, Lila discovered that Ethan Vargas had a peculiar talent for showing up at the most unexpected moments of her life. First, it was at the organic market where she shopped on Saturday mornings, seriously debating with the vendor about the difference between Italian and Thai basil. Then it was at the independent bookstore in the village, where she spent Sunday afternoons, leafing through philosophy books with a concentration that made her watch him for 15 minutes before gathering the courage to approach. Now, on a Thursday night, they sat in a small Italian restaurant in Soho that Ethan had accidentally discovered after Lila mentioned her love for authentic food. The place was intimate, with candles flickering in empty wine bottles and the aroma of garlic and basil permeating the warm air. Lila had traded her usual suits for an emerald silk blouse and dark jeans, a choice that she suspected wasn't completely innocent. "So, let me see if I've got this straight," Ethan said, twirling a fork full of carbonara with the skill of someone who had clearly spent time in Italy. "You moved to New York without knowing anyone, without a guaranteed job prospect, and with your savings fitting in a single suitcase." Lila laughed, taking a sip of Chianti that was making her cheeks pink and her tongue slightly looser. When you put it that way, it sounds completely reckless. It sounds brave, Ethan corrected, his blue eyes reflecting the golden candlelight. Most people spend their whole lives dreaming about changes like that and never have the courage to take the leap. Or maybe they're just more sensible than me. Lila shot back. But there was a smile playing on her lips. She was discovering that she liked the way Ethan saw the world and how he saw her in it. Common sense is overrated, Ethan declared, raising his glass in a toast. To Lila, Harper's brave recklessness. They clinked glasses, and Lila felt that familiar warmth course through her body whenever Ethan looked at her that way, as if she were a fascinating puzzle he was determined to solve. "Okay, your turn," she said, cutting a piece of chicken parmesan. "Tell me something reckless you've done." Ethan hesitated for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "At 25, I quit a perfectly safe job at my parents' consulting firm to start my own company with 2 friends and $5,000 between the 3 of us. And?" Lila asked, intrigued by the shadow that passed through his eyes. "And I discovered that not all partnerships survive success," Ethan said, his voice becoming slightly more serious. "When the company took off, let's just say my partner's priorities changed. I kept control." But he shrugged. "I learned that trust is an expensive luxury in the business world." Lila studied his face, noticing the almost imperceptible tension around his eyes. "That must have been difficult, losing friends and almost losing everything you built." "It was," Ethan admitted, but then his smile returned. "But it also taught me that sometimes you need to be willing to bet everything on what you believe in, even if it means being alone for a while." There was a vulnerability in his words that made something tighten in Lila's chest. She was beginning to understand that behind Ethan's apparent confidence was someone who had learned to be cautious with his heart. "And now," she asked softly, "do you still feel alone?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes dark in the soft light. "Not so much lately," he said. And there was something in the way he said it that made Lila feel butterflies in her stomach. To break the intensity of the moment, Lila changed the subject. "Well, since we're sharing embarrassing stories, I should confess that I spent my first 2 months in New York talking to my cat like he was my therapist." Ethan almost spit out his wine. "You have a cat? And I didn't know this. Why?" "Because Sir Pounce is very particular about who he socializes with," Lila said with fake seriousness. "He has very high standards." "Sir Pounce," Ethan repeated, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "You gave your cat the most stereotypical name possible." "Hey," Lila protested, laughing. "He came with that name from the shelter. And besides, it perfectly matches his pretentious personality." "Now, I need to meet this Sir Pounce," Ethan declared. "Any cat who served as your personal therapist must be extraordinary. Be careful what you wish for," Lila warned, feeling surprisingly comfortable with the idea of Ethan in her apartment. "As a very harsh judge of character, the last person I brought home he completely ignored for 3 hours. And that's bad," Ethan asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "For Sir Pounce, ignoring someone is basically a declaration of war," Lila explained. "When he likes someone, he becomes obsessive. He purrs, follows the person around the house, brings his favorite toys." "Sounds familiar," Ethan murmured so quietly that Lila almost didn't hear. "Sorry," she asked, feeling her cheeks flush. "Nothing," Ethan said quickly, but there was an amused smile playing on his lips, just thinking that Sir Pounce and I might have more in common than I imagined. Lila looked at him suspiciously. "Are you suggesting you're obsessive? When something's worth it?" "Absolutely," Ethan replied without hesitation, his eyes fixed on hers. "I believe in going after what I want with total determination." The air between them shifted again, charging with that electric tension that seemed to arise whenever they got too serious. Lila took another sip of wine, trying to calm the nerves that were suddenly frayed. "And what do you want now?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and intimate. "Honestly, I want to know why an intelligent, funny, and absolutely fascinating woman like you hides behind serious suits and pretends to be more ordinary than you really are." Lila felt her heart speed up. "I don't hide." "Don't you?" Ethan challenged gently. "Then why is it that every time I compliment you, you look surprised, as if you've never heard it before? Why do you choose to sit in the back at social events and observe instead of participate. Why? Maybe because I'm not used to attention. Lila interrupted, feeling exposed. Maybe because I was always the quiet girl people didn't notice. Well, I'm sorry to inform you, but now you have my complete attention, Ethan said, his voice loaded with an intensity that made Lila feel like she was melting. And I have no intention of looking away. Lila stared at him, lost in those blue eyes that seemed to see directly through all her carefully constructed defenses. There was a promise there, something that both terrified and thrilled her. Ethan, she began, but didn't know how to finish the sentence. I know, he said softly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. I know this is intense. I know it's fast. But Lila, there's something here that I've never felt before, and I have a feeling you feel it too. Lila looked at their intertwined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. He was right. There was something between them that defied logic and caution, something that made her want to be braver than she'd ever been. Maybe, she admitted quietly. Ethan smiled, that devastating smile that made her heart do somersaults. Then how about we let that maybe turn into something more? When Lila looked into his eyes again, she knew she was already lost. The question was no longer whether she would fall, it was just when and how deeply she would allow herself to fall. The first misunderstanding arrived on a Monday morning, wrapped in expensive perfume and a predatory smile that Lila immediately recognized as the kind that always made her feel inadequate. She was waiting for Ethan at the entrance of the small cafe where they'd arranged to meet before work. A ritual that had become a natural part of their weeks when a stunning woman approached him from behind. Valeria Moretti was exactly the type of woman Lila imagined frequented Ethan's world. Tall, slender, with perfectly waved blonde hair that looked like it had stepped out of a magazine editorial, and wearing an outfit that probably cost more than Lila's monthly salary. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, and when she placed a possessive hand on Ethan's arm, Lila felt her stomach clench painfully. Ethan, darling, Valeria exclaimed, her voice carrying a slight French accent that sounded too cultivated to be completely natural. What a wonderful surprise to find you here. Lila watched from across the street as Ethan turned, his expression changing from surprise to something that looked like polite discomfort. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the body language, the way Valeria leaned very close to him, how her fingers traced patterns on his arm while she spoke, how she laughed at something he said with an intimacy that made Lila feel like she was watching something private. For 5 long minutes, Lila stood paralyzed on the opposite sidewalk, watching that perfect woman chat with a man who had begun to occupy her thoughts in ways that frightened her. With each passing second, the cruel voice in her head, that voice that always reminded her of her inadequacies, grew louder. Of course he knows women like that. The voice whispered venomously, Look at her. Look at yourself. Did you really think someone like Ethan Vargas would be interested in an ordinary data analyst from Ohio? When Valeria leaned in to kiss Ethan's cheek goodbye, a kiss that lasted half a second longer than would be appropriate between casual acquaintances, Lila felt something break inside her chest. Without waiting to see his reaction, she turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, her hands trembling as she fished her phone from her purse. Something came up at work. Can't meet today. Sorry, L. She sent the message and turned off her phone, ignoring the insistent vibrations that began almost immediately. For the next 3 days, Lila avoided Ethan with the determination of someone dodging a contagious disease. She changed her route to work, shopped in different places, and when he showed up at her office on Wednesday afternoon, devastatingly elegant in a charcoal suit that highlighted his blue eyes, she pretended to be too busy for more than polite, superficial conversation. Lila, Ethan said, his voice loaded with a frustration she hadn't heard before. Can we talk in private? Lila looked around the open office, noticing how several female colleagues had stopped pretending to work to observe the attractive man who had clearly come to see her. I'm really busy today, Lila murmured, keeping her eyes fixed on her computer screen. Maybe another day. Lila. The way he said her name, low, intimate, with a note of something that sounded dangerously close to desperation, made something clench in her chest. Please, she finally looked at him, and what she saw in his blue eyes almost destroyed her resolve. There was confusion there, and pain, and a raw vulnerability that completely contrasted with his always confident appearance. 5 minutes. She gave in, standing up from her desk. Conference room 3. The conference room was empty, its large windows offering a view of the city that Lila normally found calming. Today, she barely noticed. Ethan closed the door behind them and turned to face her, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Shed learned to recognize as a sign that he was struggling to find the right words. "What did I do?" he asked directly without beating around the bush. "On Monday you were excited about our coffee date, and since then, you've been avoiding me like I have a contagious disease. So, tell me, what happened?" Lila crossed her arms, a defensive barrier between them. "Nothing happened. I just realized maybe we were moving too fast," Ethan said, and the word came out with more force than he clearly intended. He took a deep breath and tried again, his voice softer. "Sorry, but Lila, that's a lie, and we both know it. Friday night, you were laughing in my arms after I insisted on walking you to your apartment. You let me meet Sir Pounce for God's sake, and he actually brought his favorite toys to me, so don't tell me nothing happened." Lila felt her defenses beginning to crack. The mention of Sir Pounce, who really had fallen for Ethan in a way that surprised her, made her heart tighten. She remembered how Ethan had sat on the floor of her small apartment, patiently playing with the cat while she made tea, how Head seemed genuinely interested in her plants and books, and the small life Shed built for herself. "I saw you," she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "Monday morning with that woman, Valeria." Ethan frowned, genuine confusion crossing his face. "Valeria?" "Valeria Moretti. She seemed intimate," Lila continued, hating how her voice sounded small and insecure. "And I thought, well, she's clearly the type of woman who frequents your world. And Lila, stop," Ethan interrupted, taking a step toward her. "Valeria's married to my cousin, Marco. She was telling me she's pregnant and wanted me to know before the official family announcement." Lila blinked, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. "She what?" "She's pregnant," Ethan repeated, his eyes never leaving hers. "With Marco, my cousin. They've been married for 5 years. He took another step forward. "Lila, did you really think it'd be here begging for 5 minutes of your time if I were interested in someone else?" The logic of his words hit Lila like a slap. Of course, it didn't make sense. If Ethan were interested in Valeria or anyone else, why would he have shown up at her office looking genuinely distressed by the way she was avoiding him? She began, but the words were lost. How could she explain the insecurity that had taken hold of her? How could she describe the voice in her head that constantly reminded her she wasn't good enough, pretty enough, sophisticated enough? "Lila," Ethan said softly, now close enough to touch her face if he wanted to. "Look at me." She reluctantly raised her eyes, preparing to see disappointment or irritation. Instead, she found a tenderness that made her eyes fill with tears. "Since the moment I spilled coffee on you," he said, his voice low and intense. "There's been no one else, not Valeria, not anyone else. Just you, and if you need time to believe that, I can wait. But don't push me away based on misunderstandings and insecurities that have no foundation in reality." Lila felt a tear escape, followed by another. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have. I just saw you two together, and she was so beautiful and confident, and you are 1,000 times more fascinating than she could ever be," Ethan said firmly, finally touching her face, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Lila, don't you understand? It's not your appearance that captivated me, though you are absolutely beautiful. It's your intelligence, your kindness, the way you see the world. It's how you blush when I compliment you, how you talk to your cat like he's a person, how you bite your lip when you're thinking. It's the way you made coffee for me Friday and told me about your favorite books like you were sharing secret treasures." Lila closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her like warm rain after a long drought. "Did I ruin everything?" she asked in a small voice. Ethan laughed softly, resting his forehead against hers. "Lila, you'd have to do much more than run away from me for 3 days to scare me off. Though," he added, with a smile she could hear in his voice, "if you're going to do that again, how about talking to me first? My heart can't handle many scares like that." Lila opened her eyes and found herself lost in those blue eyes that had become so familiar and still made her feel like she was falling. "Ethan, yes. Next time I'm being an idiot, can you just kiss me to make me stop?" The smile that lit up his face was like the sun emerging after a storm. "With pleasure," he murmured, leaning in to do exactly that. The evening had arrived with unexpected softness for October in New York, bringing with it warm air that carried the scent of autumn's last flowers, mixed with the familiar aroma of the city. Lila and Ethan had spent the last 4 hours wandering through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing, from life philosophies to what the best ice cream flavor was, with the ease of people who had finally found somewhere they belonged. Now they sat on a bench near the lake, where the golden light of sunset danced on the water's surface like liquid diamonds. Lila had kicked off her shoes and folded her legs beneath her, her floral dress, a deliberately feminine choice that still surprised her, fluttering gently in the evening breeze. Ethan was relaxed beside her, his leather jacket thrown over the back of the bench, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that Lila had discovered to be surprisingly distracting. "So, let me see if I've got this straight," Ethan was saying, his eyes sparkling with amusement as he gestured with a water bottle they'd bought from a street vendor. "You actually spent 3 months planning how to ask for a raise, rehearsed the speech in the mirror every morning. And when you finally walked into your boss's office, I asked if he wanted coffee." Lila finished, hiding her face in her hands as she laughed. He said, "Yes, I brought him coffee and left the room without mentioning the raise a single time." Ethan burst into laughter, that rich, warm sound that had become one of Lila's favorite things in the world. "And how long did it take you to try again?" 6 months, Lila admitted, peeking between her fingers. "And the second time I actually managed to form the words, but I was so nervous I spilled coffee all over the reports on his desk." "And you still got the raise?" Lila smiled, finally taking her hands away from her face. He said, "Anyone brave enough to destroy important documents in the name of salary justice deserved recognition." "Smart man," Ethan approved, leaning closer to pull a leaf that had gotten caught in her hair. His fingers brushed her cheek in the process, and Lila felt that familiar warmth course through her skin. "Though I suspect he knew exactly how valuable you were long before the coffee incident." Lila studied his face in the golden light, noticing how his features seemed softer in this light, more accessible. Over the past few weeks, she had begun unconsciously cataloging all of Ethan's details, how he always ordered coffee without sugar, but added 2 spoonfuls when he thought she wasn't looking, how he had a small scar above his left eyebrow that had explained was the result of an unsuccessful attempt to impress a girl at 12 by trying to skateboard, how his eyes grew darker when he was focused and lighter when he laughed. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked softly, and Lila realized she'd been staring at him for too long. "About how surreal this is," she answered honestly. 2 months ago I barely talked to strangers in elevators, and now, he encouraged when she hesitated. Lila took a deep breath, gathering courage. "And now, I'm sitting in Central Park with the most interesting man I've ever met, telling embarrassing stories, and feeling more like myself than I've ever felt." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, an intensity that made the air between them charge with electricity. "Lila," he said, his voice lower now, "do you have any idea what it means to me to hear you say that?" Lila felt her heart speed up. "What do you mean?" Ethan turned completely to face her, one hand finding its way to her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek. "It means I've spent my whole life looking for someone who would make me feel exactly this. Like I could be completely myself, without masks, without pretenses. And then you bump into me in a cafe with spilled coffee and nervous smiles, and suddenly everything makes sense." Lila felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that come when something deep inside you finally finds its place. "Ethan, I'm in love with you," he said simply, the words coming out as if they were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm in love with the way you bite your lip when you're nervous. How you talk to plants like they can answer back. How you blush every time I say something sweet. I'm in love with your intelligence, your kindness, the way you see beauty in small things that other people ignore." Lila felt like the world had stopped spinning. No one had ever spoken to her this way, as if she were something precious, something worthy of being admired and protected. She began, but the words got lost somewhere between her heart and her throat. "You don't need to say anything," Ethan whispered, leaning closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "I just wanted you to know." But Lila discovered she needed to say something. She needed to find words for the feeling that had grown inside her over the past weeks. Something so big and overwhelming that it both scared and thrilled her. "Me too," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "I'm in love with you too. For how you make me laugh even on my worst days. For how you really listen when I talk. for how you make me feel brave enough to be who I really am." The smile that lit up Ethan's face was like watching the sunrise, slow, warm, transformative. "Lila," he murmured, and there was so much love in his voice that she felt like she could float. And then he kissed her. It wasn't like kisses in movies. It wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was soft, tender, like a question he was asking with his lips that she answered by leaning closer. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of lazy mornings and nights of deep conversation, of a life built together one day at a time. When they separated, Lila found herself breathless, her hands somehow having found their way to the back of his neck, fingers tangled in his soft hair. "Wow," she whispered, and Ethan laughed softly. "Wow is a start," he agreed, gently kissing the tip of her nose. "Though I was hoping for something more elaborate." Lila laughed, the sound coming out like music in the quiet night. "How about life-changing, earth-moving, completely perfect? Now you're speaking my language." Ethan murmured against her lips before kissing her again, this time with more confidence, more passion. When they finally separated, breathless and smiling like teenagers, Lila realized that something fundamental had changed, not just between them, but within her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly loved, truly alive. "Ethan," she whispered, playing with the buttons of his shirt. He murmured, clearly distracted by the sensation of having her so close. "Thank you." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "For what?" Lila smiled, feeling braver than Shed ever felt. "For teaching me that I'm worthy of being loved." Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Lila, my dear, sweet Lila," he murmured against her hair. "You are always worthy. I just had the luck of being the man who got to make you believe it." As they stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms under the emerging stars, Lila knew her life had changed irrevocably. She had found her place, not in a city or job, but in the arms of a man who saw her exactly as she was, and loved her precisely for that. And for the first time in her life, that was more than enough. It was everything. 3 weeks after that kiss that changed everything in Central Park, Lila found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, looking at a version of herself she barely recognized. The wine-colored silk dress Shed bought that afternoon, an impulsive purchase that made her question her own sanity, hugged her curves in a way that made her feel simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and Shed even ventured into bolder makeup, highlighting her brown eyes in a way that made them look mysterious, almost feline. This wasn't the careful, planned Lila Shed always been. This was a version of her that was ready to give herself completely to the love that had blossomed between her and Ethan, a love that had grown from shy whispers to something deep and overwhelming that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. Ethan had planned the evening with the care of someone who understood the importance of the moment. Dinner at a small French restaurant Head discovered in the village, followed by a walk through Soho under the city's golden lights. Now they were in her apartment. Ethan's first step through her door since that first night when he met Sir Pounce, and Lila felt her heart beating with an intensity that made her wonder if it was possible to die from anticipation. "You're nervous," Ethan observed softly, standing near her living room window, where the soft light from the candles Shed lit danced across his face. Head removed his tie, and the first 2 buttons of his shirt were open, revealing a slice of skin that made Lila's mouth go dry. "A little," she admitted, joining him by the window, where they could see the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "It's just this is new for me." Not just the she gestured vaguely between them, but letting someone in like this really in. Ethan turned to face her completely, his hands finding her arms, thumbs tracing soothing circles on her skin. "Lila, you know we don't have to do anything you're not ready for, right? We can just stay here talking and kissing until the sun comes up." The tenderness in his voice, the complete absence of pressure or expectation, was what finally broke down Lila's last barriers. This man, who could have any woman he wanted, was standing in her small apartment, offering her all the time in the world, as if she were a treasure that deserved to be discovered slowly. "I want to," she said softly, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "I want this. I want you. It's just that." "What?" Ethan asked when she hesitated, one hand rising to gently touch her face. Lila took a deep breath, gathering courage for complete honesty. "I'm afraid I won't be good enough. that I won't know how to make you feel the way you make me feel." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was so tender. It made her eyes fill with tears. "Oh, my sweet Lila," he murmured, gently kissing her forehead. "Don't you understand? You already make me feel more than anyone ever has. Your kindness, your laughter, the way you look at me like I'm something special. That's more than enough. You are more than enough." Before Lila could respond, Ethan kissed her. A soft, sweet kiss that gradually deepened as she melted against him. Her hands found their way to his hair, fingers tangling in the silky strands as he pulled her closer, as if he couldn't get enough of her. "Lila," he whispered against her lips, his voice rough with restrained desire. "Are you sure?" In response, she leaned in to kiss him again, this time with a passion that surprised her. All her insecurities and fears seemed to melt under the heat of his lips, replaced by a burning need she had never experienced before. Ethan gently led her to the bedroom, his hands never leaving her skin, as if he were memorizing every curve, every sigh. The soft light from the bedside lamp cast golden shadows on the walls, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Lila feel like they were in their own private world. When Ethan began kissing her neck, tracing a path of fire across her sensitive skin, Lila felt something break inside her, not from pain, but from a vulnerability so intense it made her gasp. "Ethan," she whispered, her hands gripping his shoulders as if he were her only anchor in the storm of sensations. "I'm here," he murmured against her skin, his hands trembling slightly as they slid down the back of her dress. "I'm right here with you." What followed was a slow, tender dance of mutual discovery. Ethan touched her, as if she were made of precious porcelain, each caress deliberate and reverent. Lila found herself responding in ways she didn't know she was capable of, her body awakening under his experienced hands like a flower opening to the sun. When they finally came together, Lila felt a sharp pain that made her gasp, tears involuntarily springing to her eyes. Ethan stopped immediately, his face a mask of concern. "Lila, did I hurt you? We should stop." "No," she whispered, her hands finding his face, pulling him closer. "Don't stop. I want this. I want you." But when the intensity increased, when Ethan moved deeper within her, Lila felt a wave of sensation so intense it stole her breath. It was pain and pleasure intertwined in a way she didn't know was possible, and the words left her lips before she could stop them. "It hurts," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "But I want more." Ethan stopped again, his blue eyes dark with concern and something deeper. A tenderness so intense it made Lila's heart clench. "Darling," he whispered, kissing away her tears, "you're stronger than you know." His words were like a balm to her soul, an affirmation she didn't know she needed to hear. In that moment, Lila understood that Ethan wasn't just making love to her body. He was seeing her soul, recognizing her courage, honoring her vulnerability. What followed was a connection so deep and complete that Lila felt like she was falling apart and rebuilding herself at the same time. Each of Ethan's movements was calculated for her pleasure, each whisper an adoration, each touch a promise. When they finally reached climax together, Lila found herself crying, not from pain, but from a joy so intense she couldn't contain it. Ethan held her against his chest, murmuring words of love and adoration as she trembled in his arms. "I love you," she whispered against his skin, the words coming out like a prayer. "I love you too," Ethan replied, kissing the top of her head, more than words can express. Later, when they were intertwined under the sheets, Lila resting her head on Ethan's chest while he traced lazy patterns on her back, she knew something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't just the physical act of love. It was the complete surrender of their hearts, the fusion of two souls into one. "Ethan," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, my love. Thank you for being patient with me, for making me feel precious." Ethan leaned down to kiss her forehead, pulling her closer. "Lila, you are precious, and tonight, you gave me the most beautiful gift anyone could give, your trust, your love, yourself. How could I be anything but grateful?" Lila smiled in the darkness, finally understanding what people meant when they talked about finding their other half. In Ethan, she had found not just a lover, but a partner, someone who saw strength where she only saw weakness, who loved her imperfections as much as her virtues. And as she drifted off to sleep in his arms, Lila knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer the shy girl from Ohio. She was a woman who had found courage in love, strength in vulnerability, and home in the arms of the man who loved her exactly as she was. The first lights of dawn filtered through Lila's apartment curtains, painting golden stripes across the sheets, where she and Ethan were still intertwined. Lila awakened slowly, her consciousness emerging like a butterfly leaving its cocoon. And for a moment she allowed herself to simply exist in that space between sleep and wakefulness, where everything seemed possible and nothing had changed yet. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the way her body naturally molded to Ethan's, in the intimate familiarity of waking up beside him, in the warmth that spread through her chest as she watched him sleep, his hair disheveled, a shadow of stubble darkening his chin, lips slightly parted in complete relaxation. The past 6 weeks had been like living in a golden dream. After that night that sealed their love so deeply and completely, Lila and Ethan had settled into a routine that felt simultaneously new and as if it had always existed. Mornings began with shared coffee and newspapers spread between them on Lila's small table. Afternoons were filled with spontaneous walks through the city or quiet evenings cooking together. And the nights were a continuous exploration of intimacy that went far beyond the physical. Lila had discovered that Ethan snored very lightly when he was deeply relaxed, that he had a scar on the inside of his left wrist from childhood surgery, that he spoke Italian when he was excited or frustrated, and that he always left a half-finished cup of coffee somewhere before starting a new one. Ethan, in turn, had catalogued Lila's little quirks: how she organized her books by color instead of author, how she talked to her plants every morning like they were old friends, how she always checked 3 times that the door was locked before going to sleep. But while they had created a perfect bubble of happiness in their private worlds, Lila was beginning to realize that the world around them had opinions about their relationship, and not all of them were positive. It all started with seemingly innocent comments. Emma, her co-worker, who had initially been impressed with Ethan, began making increasingly pointed observations. "Are you sure you really know him well?" she asked on a Thursday afternoon while they were organizing reports in the filing room. "I mean, you've only been together a few months and he's practically living in your apartment already." Lila tried to laugh off the observation, but the words planted a seed of doubt she couldn't completely ignore, especially when her mother called the following Sunday. "Honey," Elena Harper's familiar voice came through the phone, with that tone Lila recognized as maternal concern, disguised as casual curiosity. "Tell me more about this, Ethan. You mentioned he has his own company." "Yes, Mom. Security software for corporations. He's very successful." "Ah." A pause that spoke volumes. "And he's older than you." "A few years," Lila replied carefully, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. "Lila, dear, just be careful, okay? Older men with money sometimes look for young, innocent girls for reasons that aren't the best." Lila had ended the call feeling agitated and defensive, but her mother's words echoed in her mind over the following days. Not that she believed them. She knew Ethan knew his heart, knew that his love for her was genuine. But it was impossible to completely ignore the voices suggesting she was being naive. Things got worse when she and Ethan went to one of his work events, an elegant dinner at a private club in Manhattan, where Lila immediately felt out of place among women in dresses that cost more than her monthly salary, and men discussing investments and corporate acquisitions as if they were talking about the weather. "So, you're Ethan's girlfriend," said a blonde woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, approaching Lila while Ethan was busy talking with some clients. "How interesting." Lila forced a smile. "Yes, I'm Lila. Natalie Eastwood." The woman introduced herself, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "I've known Ethan for years. I must say, you're different from the women he usually dates." Lila felt her stomach clench. "Different? How?" Natalie gave a laugh that sounded crystalline and cruel. "Oh dear, I didn't mean anything bad by it. It's just that Ethan has always been attracted to more sophisticated women, worldly. You seem so sweet, innocent." Before Lila could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his hand automatically finding the small of her back, a possessive and protective gesture she'd learned to love. "Natalie," he said, and there was a coldness in his voice Lila had never heard before. "I see you've met Lila. We were just chatting," Natalie replied. But something in Ethan's expression made her take a step back. "Lila seems charming." "She is," Ethan said firmly, pulling Lila closer. "If you'll excuse us, Natalie, there were some people I wanted to introduce Lila to." As Ethan led her away, Lila could feel the curious stares of other guests, could hear the low murmur of conversations that stopped abruptly when they passed. For the first time since they'd started dating, she felt exposed, judged, like an exotic animal on display. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked when they reached a quieter corner of the ballroom, his hands framing her face with concern. "You look pale," Lila forced a smile. "I'm fine, just not used to this kind of environment." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, and Lila had the feeling he could see right through her carefully constructed defenses. "Lila," he said softly, "it doesn't matter what anyone in this room thinks or says. You're here with me because I want you here. Because I love you. Because you're the most intelligent, funny, and genuine woman I've ever met." "But she's right, isn't she?" Lila heard herself saying, her insecurities finally overflowing. "I am different from the women you usually date. I don't belong in this world." Ethan took a deep breath, and when he spoke, there was an intensity in his voice that made Lila look directly into his eyes. "You're absolutely right," he said. And for a moment, Lila's heart stopped. "You are completely different from any woman I've ever met. And do you know why? Because they were superficial, calculating, interested in what I could give them instead of who I really was. You're the first person who looked at me, really looked, and saw beyond the money and status." He took her hands, intertwining their fingers. "Lila, you don't need to belong to my world. I want to belong to yours. I want to wake up in your little apartment with Sir Pounce trying to steal my spot in bed. I want to watch you talk to your plants and read to me at night. I want to build a life with you, not because you fit what people expect, but because you're exactly who I need." Lila felt tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "What if they don't accept that?" she whispered. Ethan smiled, gently kissing her lips. "Then they can go to hell. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." That night, walking hand in hand through the illuminated streets of Manhattan, Lila finally understood something fundamental about true love. It wasn't about fitting into someone's world. It was about creating a new world together, a place where both could be completely authentic. And as Ethan stopped under a streetlight to kiss her right there on the sidewalk with people passing and horns honking around them, Lila knew they had found exactly that. Their own world, built on a foundation of genuine love, mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. The rest of the world could have its opinions, but Ethan was right. The only opinion that really mattered was theirs. The crisis came on an ordinary Tuesday in November, disguised as a seemingly innocent conversation over lunch. Lila was sitting in the small cafe where it all began, an irony that didn't go unnoticed with her college friend Brianna, who was visiting New York on business. Brianna was everything Lila once thought she wanted to be. Confident, worldly, with a rising career in marketing and a series of sophisticated relationships that she narrated like chapters from a cosmopolitan romance. "So, this is the famous Ethan," Brianna said, studying a photo on Lila's phone with the expression of someone analyzing a work of art. "I have to admit, Lila, he really is impressive. But..." Lila felt her stomach clench. There was always a but when people looked at her relationship with Ethan. "But what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Brianna put the phone on the table and leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. "Lila, do you really think a man like him, wealthy, sophisticated, clearly used to having anything he wants, is going to be satisfied with?" "Well, with what?" Lila asked, though part of her already knew where this conversation was heading. "With you," Brianna said, not cruelly, but with a brutal honesty that cut deeper than any insult. "Lila, I love you. You know that. But look at yourself objectively. You're sweet, intelligent, you have a beautiful heart, but you're not. You're not the type of woman men like Ethan Vargas take seriously long term." Lila felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, you're the type of girl they have fun with for a while, a refreshing change of pace after all those calculating socialites. But when it comes time to really settle down, to choose a wife..." Brianna shrugged with an expression that was meant to be compassionate, but came across as condescending. "They always go back to women from their own world." Brianna's words echoed in Lila's mind over the following days, like a mental virus she couldn't eliminate. Every interaction with Ethan began to be filtered through this new lens of insecurity. When he mentioned an important business dinner, She wondered if he was embarrassed to take her. When he answered a work call in Italian, she became painfully aware of how little she knew about his world. When he laughed at a joke she didn't understand about financial markets, she felt the distance between their worlds like an unbridgeable chasm. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Ethan had planned a special evening, dinner at a restaurant that required months' advanced reservations, followed by a Broadway show. Lila should have been excited, but instead found herself paralyzed in front of her closet, every dress seeming inadequate, every shoe screaming her working-class origins. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, devastatingly elegant in a tuxedo that probably cost more than Lila's rent, she was sitting on the edge of her bed in her robe, her chosen dress thrown on the floor in defeat. "Lila," he called, his voice echoing through the small apartment. "Are you ready?" He stopped in the bedroom doorway, taking in the scene before him. Lila, with red eyes and disheveled hair, surrounded by rejected clothes like evidence of her fundamental inadequacy. "What happened?" Ethan asked immediately, entering the room and kneeling in front of her. "Are you sick?" "Hurt." Lila looked at him, at this handsome, successful man who had knelt on the floor of her messy bedroom without hesitation, and felt something break inside her chest. "I can't do this," she whispered, the words coming out like a confession. "Do what? Dinner? We can cancel." "It's not a problem." "No," Lila interrupted, standing abruptly and beginning to pace around the room. "I can't do this, Us. I can't keep pretending I belong in your world when I clearly don't." Ethan stood slowly, his expression changing from concern to something that looked like confusion and growing alarm. "Lila, what are you talking about? What world? It's just the two of us." "No, it's not," Lila exploded, months of repressed insecurities finally overflowing. "It's you with your expensive restaurants and your important clients and your custom-made tuxedo, and then there's me with my tiny apartment and my department store clothes and my complete ignorance about everything in your world." "You think I care about any of those things?" Ethan asked, and there was a note of genuine pain in his voice now. "Maybe not now," Lila said, the words coming out in a torrent she couldn't stop. "But you will when you get tired of having to explain financial jokes to me, when you get embarrassed taking me to your important events, when you realize you can have any sophisticated woman you want and you're wasting time with someone who doesn't even know which fork to use at a formal dinner." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Lila read confirmation of all her fears. He was finally seeing the truth she'd always known, that she wasn't good enough for him. "We're done," she said before he could speak, forcing the words out of her constricted throat. "It's better this way for both of us." The expression on Ethan's face was like watching something beautiful shatter in slow motion. "Lila, no, you can't be serious. We love each other." "You think you love me," Lila corrected, wrapping her robe tighter around her body like armor. "But it's just novelty. When that wears off, you'll thank me for being sensible enough to end this before it got even more complicated." Ethan took a step toward her, but Lila backed away. "No," she said, raising a hand. "Please, just go. And Ethan, thank you for making me feel special for a while. But now we need to get back to reality." For a moment, Ethan looked like he was going to argue, fight, refuse to accept what was happening. But then he saw something in Lila's posture. The desperate determination of someone convinced they were doing the right thing, even though it was destroying them. And the fight left his body. "If this is what you really want," he said quietly, his voice rough, "then I'll respect that. But Lila, you're wrong about everything, and when you realize that—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "When you realize that, I'll still be here." After he left, Lila allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. 5 minutes of sobs that shook her entire body and made Sir Pounce meow worriedly from the other side of the door. Then she got up, washed her face, and began the process of convincing herself she'd done the right thing. But in the 3 days that followed, Lila discovered that being right didn't make the pain any less intense. Her apartment felt emptier without Ethan's presence. Her morning coffee tasted like ashes without his laughter to season it. And Sir Pounce wandered the house looking for the man who had become part of their routine. It was Emma who finally forced Lila to face the truth. "You're an idiot," she said without ceremony on Monday morning. Finding Lila with swollen eyes and an appearance that suggested she hadn't slept properly in days. "Thanks for the support," Lila muttered, trying to focus on the numbers on her screen. "No, seriously, you're a complete idiot. You had a man who clearly adored you, who treated you like a queen, who looked at you like you were the only woman on the planet, and you threw him away. Why? Because some mean people made you feel insecure. Lila looked at Emma, ready to defend herself, but the words died in her throat when she saw her friend's expression. Lila, Emma continued, her voice softer now, have you ever stopped to think that maybe he chose you not despite who you are, but because of who you are? That maybe he was tired of all those sophisticated women and wanted something real? And it was in that moment, sitting in her sterile cubicle under fluorescent lights, that Lila finally understood what she had done. She hadn't protected herself or Ethan from inevitable disappointment. She had destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her out of fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being happy. Fear of believing she deserved to be loved. For the first time in 4 days, Lila felt something besides numbness. She felt a spark of determination, a glimmer of hope that maybe it wasn't too late to fix what she had broken. But first, she needed to find enough courage to admit she was wrong. And then she needed to hope that Ethan was still willing to believe in their love as much as she had forgotten how to. 5 days. 5 endless days since Lila had destroyed the best thing in her life in a moment of blind insecurity and paralyzing fear. 5 days of Sir Pounce looking at her with that accusatory expression that only cats can master, as if he knew exactly what kind of idiot she'd been. 5 days of waking up in a bed that faintly smelled of Ethan's cologne and feeling her heart break all over again each morning. The rain had started on Tuesday and hadn't stopped since, as if the sky itself was crying over Lila's monumental stupidity. Now, on a Thursday night that felt more like a November Monday in terms of emotional temperature, she was walking aimlessly through the wet village streets, soaked to the bone because she'd forgotten her umbrella at home, or more precisely, because a masochistic part of her thought she deserved to drown in the storm she'd created. She hadn't planned to go to the small park where Ethan had first kissed her. Her legs simply took her there as if they had their own memory, as if they knew she needed to be in the place where everything had started making sense, to fully understand how it had all fallen apart. The park was deserted, only a few lamps casting golden circles of light through the curtain of rain. Lila sat on the same bench where they'd shared stories and laughter and that first kiss that changed her life and finally allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of what she'd lost. Ethan hadn't tried to contact her since that terrible night. No calls, texts, emails, nothing. Part of her was grateful for this because she knew that if he had tried, she probably would have given in and thrown herself into his arms without resolving any of the fundamental problems that had led her to break up with him. But a bigger part was devastated by the silence, interpreting it as confirmation that Head finally realized she was right, that they really didn't belong together. That's when she saw him. Ethan was standing on the other side of the park near the entrance like an apparition from her most desperate dreams. He was as soaked as she was, his dark wool coat clinging to his body, hair dripping water down his face. Even at a distance, even through the rain and darkness, Lila could see the tension in his posture, the way he stood completely still, as if he were fighting an internal battle over whether to approach or simply walk away. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they simply looked at each other across the distance and rain. Lila felt her heart stop, then accelerate so violently she was sure it would explode. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to run toward him or away from him. She couldn't tell. It was Ethan who made the decision. He began walking toward her, not quickly, but with that controlled determination she recognized that she'd seen in him the first time they'd met. Rain beat down on his shoulders as he approached, and Lila could see that his eyes never left hers, as if he was afraid she'd disappear if he blinked. "Lila," he said when he finally got close enough to be heard over the sound of rain. His voice was rough in a way that made her heart clench. "Ethan," she whispered back, standing from the bench on shaky legs. "What are you? Why are you here?" He gave a laugh that had no humor in it. "I could ask you the same thing. But the truth? I've been coming here every night since Monday. Kind of hoping you'd show up." Lila felt tears mixing with rain on her face. "Ethan, I know," he interrupted gently, taking a step closer. "Let me talk first, please." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his words came out in a torrent, as if He'd been rehearsing for days. "You were wrong," he said simply. "About everything, about me, about us. About what I want, Lila. For the past 5 days, I've tried to go back to my life from before. I tried to convince myself that you were right, that maybe it was better this way. And you know what happened." Lila shook her head, unable to form words. "I realized that nothing made sense without you. My apartment, my work, my friends, everything seemed empty and colorless. I realized I wasn't living before I met you. I was just existing, going through the motions of a life that looked good on paper, but was completely hollow at the center." He took another step forward, and now they were close enough that Lila could see the raindrops on his eyelashes, the raw intensity in his blue eyes. "You want to know the truth about those sophisticated women from my world," Ethan continued, his voice growing more intense. "They were boring, predictable. They wanted the version of me I presented to the world. Successful, polished, financially stable. None of them ever made me laugh until my stomach hurt. None of them ever looked at me with the genuine admiration you had when I told stories about my work. None of them ever made me want to be a better version of myself." Lila was crying openly now, sobs shaking her body as years of insecurity began to unravel under the weight of his words. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she managed to say through tears. "I was so scared of not being good enough that you'd eventually realize you could have something better." "Better?" Ethan asked, and there was something close to desperation in his voice. "Now, Lila, how can I make you understand? You're not the alternative to something better. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me." Without warning, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, drawing her against his wet chest. Lila melted against him instantly, her arms closing around his waist as if she could fuse them permanently together through pure willpower. "I missed you," she whispered against his chest, the words muffled by the wet fabric of his shirt. "God, Ethan, I missed you so much I thought I was going to die." "Me too," he murmured against her hair, his hands running over her back, as if he was making sure she was real. "These were the 5 worst nights of my life." They stood there for long minutes, holding each other under the relentless rain, 2 soaked and miserable human beings who had finally found their way back to each other. Lila could feel Ethan's heart beating against hers, a steady rhythm that gradually synchronized with her own, until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. "Lila," Ethan said finally, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes, "I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in changing you. I don't want you to become someone you're not to fit into my world. I want you to stay exactly as you are, kind, genuine, real, and I want to spend the rest of my life deserving you." "The rest of your life?" Lila asked, her heart skipping. Ethan smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Lila Harper, I am completely, irrevocably, permanently in love with you, and, if you'll give me another chance, I'll spend every day proving that you're exactly what I've always wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." In response, Lila leaned up and kissed him, a kiss that tasted of rain and tears and second chances. It was a kiss that spoke of forgiveness and promises, of love that had survived the storm and emerged stronger. When they finally separated, both were smiling through their tears. "Let's go home," Ethan said, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Your place or mine?" Lila asked, and for the first time in days, there was real joy in her voice. Ethan stopped and pulled her into another kiss. This one, softer, more tender. "It doesn't matter," he murmured against her lips. "Wherever you are, that's my home." As they walked hand in hand through the rain that now seemed more like a blessing than punishment, Lila finally understood what her mother always said about true love, that when it's real, when it's right, it's not about being perfect or good enough. It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves them along with everything else. And walking beside Ethan through the wet streets of New York, Lila knew she'd found exactly that. Not just a man who loved her, but a home where she could be completely herself and still be more than enough. It was more than Shed ever dared to dream. It was everything. 2 years later, on a golden Saturday morning in May, Lila woke up the same way Shed woken up almost every morning for the past 24 months, wrapped in Ethan's arms, with Sir Pounce purring like a boat engine between them on the king-size bed in the apartment they now called ours instead of mine or his. The apartment was a perfect blend of their 2 lives. Lila's plants scattered across every available surface, silently conversing with Ethan's tech gadgets. Her books organized by color on the shelves Head had specially installed for her. their small breakfast table positioned near the large windows that offered a spectacular view of Central Park. "Good morning, beautiful," Ethan murmured against her hair, his voice still rough with sleep, sending familiar shivers down her spine. "Good morning," Lila whispered back, turning in his arms to face those blue eyes that still made her heart race even after all this time. "Did you sleep well?" "I always sleep well when you're in my arms," he replied, gently kissing the tip of her nose, a gesture that had become their particular trademark of affection. It was true. Over the past 2 years, they developed a routine of intimacy that went far beyond the physical. Ethan had learned that Lila needed at least 15 minutes of lazy conversation in bed before she was ready to face the day. Lila had discovered that Ethan functioned better with strong coffee and at least one real kiss before checking his work emails. They'd navigated life's ups and downs together with an ease that sometimes surprised Lila. When Ethan's company went through a difficult restructuring that resulted in long nights and high stress, Lila had learned to massage the tension from his shoulders and make that Italian pasta that always improved his mood. When Lila received a promotion that required frequent travel, Ethan had rearranged his schedule whenever possible to accompany her, turning business trips into many romantic adventures. "What time did you say your mother was arriving?" Ethan asked, playing with a strand of Lila's hair between his fingers. Lila looked at the clock on the nightstand and sighed. "In 3 hours, enough time for coffee, pancakes, and for me to have a mini panic attack about whether she'll approve of the flowers we chose." Ethan laughed, pulling her closer. "Lila, your mother adores me now. Remember last time she was here? She told me I was exactly the kind of man she'd always hoped you'd find. That was after you fixed her faucet and cooked that elaborate dinner," Lila pointed out. "You basically won her over through domestic skills. Strategy," Ethan said with a mischievous smile. "I knew that if I won over your mother, you'd have no more excuses for your occasional insecurities." Lila gave him a playful tap on the chest. "My insecurities aren't occasional. They're very well planned and executed with precision." "Ah, so you admit they're irrational." "I admit they're vintage," Lila said with fake dignity. "Like a good wine, they improve with time." Ethan burst into laughter, rolling to pin Lila beneath him on the bed, his hands framing her face as he looked at her with that expression that still made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. "You know I love you, right?" he said, his voice becoming more serious. "Your vintage insecurities, your plants that you name, the way you still blush when I compliment you. Everything." "I know," Lila replied softly, her hands rising to touch his face. "And you know I love you too. Your obsession with gadgets that do things you can do perfectly well manually, the way you leave half-finished coffee cups on every surface. How you speak Italian when you're frustrated with computer code. Perfectly," Ethan murmured, leaning down to kiss her. The kiss started soft, familiar, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Even after 2 years, the chemistry between them hadn't diminished one bit. If anything, it had intensified. The physical passion now seasoned with a deep emotional intimacy that made every touch more meaningful. "Ethan," Lila whispered against his lips, her hands exploring the familiar muscles of his back. "We really should get up and start getting ready." "In 5 minutes," he murmured, trailing kisses along her neck. "Or 10, maybe 15. Lila laughed, but the sound quickly turned into a sigh when Ethan found that particular spot behind her ear that always made her forget any objections she might have. This was how they worked now, a perfect blend of passion and companionship, intensity and lightness. They'd learned that true love wasn't just about the big dramatic moments, but about how you navigated ordinary mornings, how you supported each other through difficult days, how you chose each other repeatedly through all the small decisions that built a life. An hour later, they were in the kitchen in a familiar dance of breakfast preparation. Ethan was making pancakes, a skill he'd perfectly mastered after discovering they were Lila's favorite breakfast food, while Lila arranged flowers in a vase, preparing for her mother's visit. "Remember that first morning after our first night together?" Lila asked, watching Ethan work with an economy of movement that spoke of practice and familiarity. "When you tried to make eggs Benedict and almost burned down my kitchen," Ethan laughed, flipping a pancake with dramatic flair. "I was nervous. I wanted to impress you with my non-existent culinary skills." "You did impress me," Lila said, moving to stand behind him, her arms circling his waist. "Not with the food, obviously, but with the fact that you tried. No one had ever tried to make breakfast for me before." Ethan turned in her arms, kissing her forehead. "And now you're stuck with my elaborate breakfasts for the rest of your life. What a tragedy," Lila said dryly. But her smile was full of genuine love. For the rest of your life. The words didn't scare her anymore like they used to. During the first months of their relationship, Lila had caught herself periodically panicking about the future, about whether she and Ethan could really make it work long term. But at some point, she couldn't pinpoint exactly when that anxiety had faded, replaced by a calm, deep certainty. They belonged to each other, not in a possessive or codependent way, but in a way that spoke of conscious choice, mutual respect, and the daily decision to build something beautiful together. "Lila," Ethan said suddenly, his voice taking on a quality she didn't immediately recognize. Nervous, anxious, but also full of barely contained excitement. "Yes," she replied, looking up to find a strange expression on his face. "There's something I want to ask you. Something I've been thinking about for a long time." Lila felt her heart speed up, but not with fear, with anticipation. "Okay." Ethan took her hands, intertwining their fingers, and for a moment simply looked at her, as if he were memorizing her face. "Remember that night," he said softly, "when you said it hurt, but you wanted more, and I told you that you were stronger than you knew." Lila nodded, unable to form words, feeling tears already beginning to form in her eyes. "That night," Ethan continued, "I realized you weren't just the woman I loved. You were the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. The person I wanted by my side through every joy, every challenge, every ordinary morning, and every extraordinary night." He released one of her hands to reach for something in his pocket, and Lila's heart stopped completely when he knelt right there in the kitchen between the half-finished pancakes and her plants that needed watering. "Lila Harper," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he opened a small velvet box that revealed the most beautiful ring shed ever seen. "Delicate, elegant, perfectly her. Would you make me the happiest man in the world by agreeing to marry me?" Lila looked at him, at this incredible man who had loved her through all her insecurities, who had seen her strength when she only saw weakness, who had built a life with her based on laughter and mutual respect, and the bravery of being completely vulnerable with each other, and knew there was only one possible answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." When Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of happy tears and future promises, Lila finally understood what it meant to be completely home. They had found their forever, not in grand gestures or perfect moments, but in the daily choice to love each other exactly as they were, to build something beautiful together, one day at a time. And when her mother arrived 3 hours later to find them still in the kitchen, still kissing, still glowing with joy, all she did was smile and say, "Well, it's about time," because sometimes true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfect for you. Someone who sees your beauty when you only see flaws. Someone who makes you laugh even on your worst days. Someone who chooses you repeatedly through every storm and every moment of sunshine. Lila had found all of that in Ethan, and now they had a lifetime to discover exactly how beautiful that journey could be. Lila and Ethan proved that true love isn't about being perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your beauty where you only see flaws. They discovered that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the courage to be completely real with another person. In every "it hurts, but I want more," but they found strength. In every "you're stronger than you know," they discovered a home, because sometimes loving means choosing the same person every day, building a forever made of ordinary mornings and extraordinary promises. And do you have the courage to believe that you also deserve a love like this?